My grandpa spent $50,000 to join our family trip to South America. He had been saving for years, skipping out on things for himself, all because he wanted one last great adventure with us. But the moment we arrived at the airport, everything fell apart. We were standing by the boarding gate when my mom turned to him and said, "Dad, I forgot your ticket. You'll have to go home." Her voice was sharp and final, like she wasn't even embarrassed to say it out loud. My grandpa's face went pale. He pulled out the envelope where he had kept every receipt, his hands shaking. "Linda, I gave you the money. You promised me everything was taken care of." My mom folded her arms and whispered, "You'll only hold us back. Just go home. We'll tell people you weren't feeling well." My dad didn't say a word. My sister rolled her eyes and muttered, "We're going to miss the flight." And in that moment, I realized this wasn't an accident. They had planned this. They wanted to leave him behind. I looked at my grandpa. His eyes were watering not from anger, but from the kind of heartbreak you only see in someone who has spent their whole life putting family first. I couldn't let him walk away humiliated and alone. So while the rest of my family marched toward the gate, I grabbed his bag and said, "I'm staying with you." Everyone stopped and stared. My mom's face twisted in disbelief, but I didn't care. I walked out of that airport beside my grandpa, not knowing that one choice would change everything. 5 weeks later, when my family came back from South America, they nearly collapsed when they saw who I had married while they were gone. Before that day at the airport, everything in our family looked perfect from the outside. We were the kind of family neighbors envied. My mom, Linda, loved to organize big trips and dinners that made us look polished and close-knit. My dad, Robert, worked long hours, but always made sure we had nice things. My younger sister, Sophie, was excited about graduating high school and already planning Instagram photos she wanted to take in Buenos Aires. And then there was my grandpa, George. He was 74 years old, a little slower on his feet, but full of energy when it came to his family. If you asked anyone in our town about him, they would tell you he was the kindest man they knew. He was the type of person who carried extra sandwiches in his truck in case he saw someone hungry by the roadside. He never forgot birthdays, and he always gave the warmest hugs that made you feel like nothing could hurt you. He was the one who taught me how to ride my bike without training wheels standing in the driveway for hours, encouraging me with that deep, steady voice of his. "You got this, Daniel. Trust yourself." When my mom announced the family was planning a 5-week trip across South America, Brazil, Argentina, Chile, Peru, it sounded like a dream. She went on and on about luxury hotels, private tours, and how this would be the trip of a lifetime. Grandpa's eyes lit up like I had never seen before. He had spent most of his life working in construction, never once leaving the country. The farthest he had ever traveled was to Texas for a wedding when he was in his 50s. For him, this was a chance to finally see the world he had only read about in books and watched in movies. The problem was money. The trip was expensive, and while my parents could cover their share, Grandpa would need to pay his own way. I remember him sitting at the kitchen table with a calculator going over numbers again and again. He had a modest pension, some savings, and a little land outside of town. Finally, he made a decision. He sold part of that land he had cared for his whole life just to afford this trip. When he handed the check to my mom, his hands were trembling, but his smile was so wide. He said, "Linda, I want to come along. This is my dream. Thank you for including me." I could see my mom's tight smile in that moment. She said, "Of course, Dad. It'll be wonderful to have you." But the way she avoided his eyes told me something was off. My dad stayed quiet as usual, his lips pressed together. At the time, I thought maybe they were just worried about how he'd manage the long flights and packed schedules. I had no idea that their intentions were much colder. In the weeks leading up to the trip, Grandpa was like a kid again. He bought a guidebook for every country on the itinerary. He kept reading little facts out loud during dinner. Daniel, did you know the Christ the Redeemer statue in Rio was once considered controversial? Or Sophie, there's a calf in Buenos Aires that's been open for 300 years. We have to try it. He even started practicing phrases in different languages, sitting in his recliner repeating, Hola, obrigado, buenda. I teased him for his accent, and he laughed, telling me he was going to charm every South American. The night before the trip, he came to my room holding an old leather journal. I'm going to write everything down, Daniel, he said. Every meal, every sight, every laugh. I want to remember this forever. He set the journal on my desk and smiled. But most of all, I'm glad you'll be there with me. Trips come and go, but sharing it with you will mean the most. I hugged him tightly, promising that this was going to be the best month of our lives. The next morning at the airport, we all gathered with our bags and passports. Grandpa wore his nicest shirt, the one he had saved for special occasions tucked into pressed slacks. He had polished his shoes the night before, and he even wore the wristwatch his late wife had given him on their anniversary decades ago. He stood there with pride, looking like he belonged exactly where he was. From the outside, everything seemed fine. My mom was checking the tickets and passports. My dad was making sure the bags were weighed correctly, and my sister was already taking selfies against the huge airport windows. But I noticed something strange. My mom barely spoke to Grandpa. She answered him with clipped replies like his excitement was bothering her. Yes, Dad. We'll see the Machu Picchu ruins. Yes, Dad. I know you want to take pictures. She acted like every word from him was a chore. Grandpa, on the other hand, didn't notice, or maybe chose not to. He just kept smiling, patting me on the shoulder, pointing out planes as they taxied down the runway. Can you believe we'll be on one of those soon? He asked, his eyes glowing. For him, the world was finally opening up. For me, it felt like something was closing in, though I couldn't explain why. Looking back now, I realized that all of his hope, all of his trust was built on a foundation that was already cracked. He believed we were a family who wanted him there. He believed my mom had arranged everything fairly and honestly. He believed that after all the sacrifices he had made, he finally deserved this. I wanted to believe it too. I had no idea that within an hour standing at that very same airport, his dream would be ripped away by the very people he loved most. The announcement for boarding echoed through the airport, and everyone around us began lining up. Families gathered their children. Couples held hands, and groups of tourists shuffled toward the gate with excitement buzzing in the air. My grandpa clutched his carry-on tighter, his smile as wide as a child on Christmas morning. He glanced at me and said, "This is it, Daniel. I can finally check this off my bucket list." His voice cracked with emotion, and I could feel the weight of how much this moment meant to him. But as we approached the gate, my mom suddenly stopped walking. She turned to my grandpa with a look that was cold and unshaken. "Dad," she said, her tone clipped and final. "I forgot your ticket. You'll have to go home." At first I thought I had misheard her. My grandpa blinked in confusion, his mouth slightly open, waiting for her to laugh or correct herself. When she didn't, his hand trembled as he reached into his pocket and pulled out the envelope where he had kept his paperwork. He held it out saying, "No, Linda, that's not possible. I gave you the money. I kept every receipt. Here, look." His voice was cracking desperate, but she didn't even reach for the envelope. Instead, she crossed her arms and lowered her voice so only we could hear. "You're not coming. You'll slow us down, and I can't drag you through airports and trains for 5 weeks. Just go home. We'll tell people you weren't feeling well." I felt my chest tighten. The way she said it calm, rehearsed without hesitation, told me this was no mistake. This had been her plan all along. My dad stood silently at her side, his jaw clenched, eyes fixed on the floor. My sister Sophie groaned in frustration, muttering, "We're going to miss the flight. Just let him go home." Grandpa's face crumpled, as though her words had physically struck him. He looked at my dad for support, whispering, "Robert, say something. I sold my land. I trusted you both." But my dad stayed silent, avoiding his gaze. It was as if the man who had married my mom had disappeared, completely replaced by a shadow too afraid to speak. "Dad," my mom continued, her voice sharp, "stop making a scene. You'll be fine here. You don't belong on a trip like this." I could hardly process what I was hearing. This was the man who had raised her, who had worked his whole life to give her opportunities. This was the man who had spent every dollar he had left to share this trip with us. And here she was, discarding him like an inconvenience. My grandpa's hand shook so violently that the envelope slipped to the floor. He bent down slowly, his knees cracking, and picked it up with as much dignity as he could muster. When he stood back up, his eyes glistened with tears. "Linda," he whispered, his voice raw and broken. "I only wanted to be with my family. That's all I wanted." The sight of him standing there humiliated in the middle of the airport while families bustled happily around us sent a surge of anger through me. I looked at my mom, then at my dad, waiting for one of them to come to their senses. But their faces were stone. They had already made their decision. Something inside me snapped. I couldn't let him walk out of that airport alone. I couldn't let him be tossed aside like his love and sacrifice meant nothing. I turned to my mom and said firmly, "If Grandpa isn't going, then I'm not going either." Her eyes widened, her lips curling into disbelief. "Daniel, don't be ridiculous," she snapped. "You've been waiting for this trip as much as anyone. Don't throw it away over a stubborn old man." "He's not just an old man," I shot back. "He's my grandpa. He's the one person who's never let me down." Sophie groaned louder this time. "You're seriously going to ruin this for all of us? Fine, stay behind if you want. Just don't expect us to wait for you." I picked up Grandpa's bag from beside his feet and slung it over my shoulder. "Come on, Grandpa. We're leaving." He looked at me, stunned. His mouth opened to protest, but I squeezed his arm. "I'm not letting you go home alone," I whispered. His eyes filled with tears again, but this time there was gratitude mixed in with the heartbreak. My mom's voice cut through the air sharp enough to draw stares from nearby passengers. "Daniel, if you walk away right now, don't expect any sympathy when you regret it." I didn't even turn back. I walked forward, pulling Grandpa gently beside me. He shuffled along, still dazed, still heartbroken, but no longer abandoned. Behind us, my family joined the boarding line without another word. As we stepped out of the terminal and back into the open air, Grandpa exhaled shakily. His shoulders slumped under the weight of what had just happened. "Daniel," he said quietly, "you didn't have to do that. You've been looking forward to this trip for months." I shook my head. "I wouldn't enjoy a second of it if it meant watching you get treated like that. We'll make our own trip, Grandpa. We'll figure it out." In that moment, I didn't care about Rio or Lima or any of the places I thought I wanted to see. All I cared about was walking beside him, holding on to the only family member who had ever truly been there for me. I had no idea what would come next, but I knew one thing for certain. I had made the only choice my heart could live with. When Grandpa and I walked out of that airport, the weight of what just happened pressed down on us. He shuffled slowly beside me, his eyes still red and swollen from tears. His grip on his bag was so tight his knuckles turned white. For the first few minutes, neither of us spoke. The noise of rolling suitcases, flight announcements, and cheerful travelers faded behind us, leaving only the sound of Grandpa's uneven breaths. Finally, he broke the silence. "Daniel, you gave up your chance to see the world. You should have gone with them." His voice was heavy, like he was blaming himself. I stopped walking and turned to him. "I don't care about South America, Grandpa. I care about you. I couldn't stand by and watch them humiliate you like that. You've always been there for me, and now I'm here for you." For a long moment, he just looked at me. His shoulders, hunched with shame a few minutes earlier, straightened slightly. He nodded, and a small flicker of relief crossed his face. "Thank you, Daniel. I don't know what I did to deserve you, but thank you." We went back to his house that day, both of us exhausted. His old recliner creaked as he sank into it, and I sat across from him. The silence in the room felt different than before. It wasn't heavy with humiliation anymore. It was filled with a quiet resolve, the kind that settles in after you make a choice you know you cannot undo. The following days were awkward at first. My phone buzzed with messages from Sophie, short and dismissive. "You're crazy. You'll regret this. We're in Buenos Aires, and it's amazing." My mom didn't text at all. My dad sent a single message. "We'll talk when we get back." I deleted it without replying. Grandpa tried to go about his usual routines, watering the garden, reading the newspaper, making coffee, but I could see the sadness still lingering. I wanted to pull him out of it. One morning I said, "Grandpa, let's do something different today. We don't need South America to make memories. Let's make our own adventure right here." He chuckled, shaking his head. "What kind of adventure can two people have in a small town?" "You'd be surprised," I said, grabbing his keys. "Come on, trust me." That day we drove out to a nearby lake he had always loved but rarely visited. We rented a small rowboat and spent the afternoon drifting on the water. Grandpa's laughter echoed across the lake when I nearly tipped us trying to reel in a fish. He leaned back, the sun warming his face, and for the first time since the airport, he looked peaceful. Over the next 2 weeks, we found joy in places we had ignored before. We explored little diners on the edge of town, tried foods neither of us had eaten, and even went to a local cultural festival where the streets were filled with music, dancing, and handmade crafts. Grandpa carried his old leather journal everywhere, writing down every detail. One evening, while we sat on a park bench eating kettle corn, he showed me a page. I thought I needed South America to fill this journal. Turns out I just needed the right company. That night at the festival was when everything changed. Grandpa noticed a booth for a local charity that helped elderly veterans and their families. He stopped to chat with the volunteers, his natural kindness drawing them in. That was where I met Emily. She was 26 with bright brown eyes and a smile that could calm a storm. She was handing out pamphlets, her hands busy, but her voice warm as she explained the organization's work. I offered to help her carry a box of supplies to the back, and we struck up a conversation. She told me about her passion for helping others, how her own grandfather had inspired her to give back. There was something about her that felt genuine in a way I hadn't experienced before. Grandpa, always quick to notice, pulled me aside after we left. "She's special," he said, raising his eyebrows knowingly. I laughed it off, but deep down I knew he was right. Over the next few days, I kept finding reasons to see her again. We met for coffee, then lunch, then an evening walk by the river. Every time she asked about Grandpa, and every time she insisted on joining us for the little adventures we had started creating. With Emily around, Grandpa seemed more alive than ever. He joked with her, shared stories about his younger years, and even taught her how to bait a fishing hook when we went back to the lake. She listened to him with respect and affection, something my mom had never shown him. Watching them bond made me realize how different life could be when surrounded by people who actually cared. By the 3rd week, I knew my connection with Emily was more than just a passing spark. We talked late into the night about our values, our dreams, and what family meant to us. She understood me in a way no one else had, and she accepted Grandpa as part of the package without hesitation. One evening, while Grandpa sat on the porch watching the sunset, Emily and I sat beside him. I took her hand, feeling the weight of the decision forming inside me. I glanced at Grandpa, and he gave me a small, knowing nod like he could read my thoughts before I even spoke. The humiliation at the airport had been the worst moment of his life, but standing by him had opened a door I never expected. While my family was chasing landmarks across South America, I was building something real at home. A choice that began out of loyalty to my grandpa was about to change the course of my entire future. The 5 weeks passed faster than I ever thought they could. While my family posted photos of Rio cafes and Lima's ancient ruins, I spent my days with Grandpa and Emily. We cooked meals together, visited places I had overlooked in my own hometown, and built bonds that felt deeper than anything a vacation could give me. By the final week, Emily and I knew we wanted to spend our lives together. It was sudden, yes, but every day with her had stripped away doubt and replaced it with certainty. Grandpa, grinning like a proud father, stood as my best man when Emily and I exchanged vows in a simple ceremony at the courthouse. There were no fancy decorations or exotic backdrops, but it was real, and it was ours. The day my family was due to return, Grandpa and I sat on the porch together. He leaned back in his chair, a quiet confidence about him. "They'll be here soon," he said. "Are you ready for this?" I tightened my grip on Emily's hand. More than ever. When the taxi pulled up, my mom was the first to step out. She wore designer sunglasses, her suitcase rolling neatly behind her. My dad followed, carrying extra bags, and my sister hopped out last phone in hand, snapping a quick picture of the house she hadn't seen in a month. They looked sunburned and satisfied, glowing with the pride of having seen the world. Linda spotted me on the porch and smirked. "So how was your little staycation, Daniel? I hope you enjoyed babysitting." Her eyes flicked to Grandpa, and the disdain in her tone was sharp enough to sting. "You didn't miss much. South America was incredible, and I can't imagine dragging an old man through all of that. You should thank me." Her words rolled off me like rain against stone. I rose slowly, pulling Emily to her feet beside me. My mom's smirk faltered when she noticed her, then turned into suspicion. "Who's this?" I took a deep breath and spoke clearly. "This is my wife, Emily. We got married while you were gone." The words hit like a thunderclap. My mom's mouth opened, but no sound came out. She staggered back a step, her suitcase slipping from her grip. My sister gasped so loudly it drew a stare from the taxi driver. My dad froze, his eyes widening as though he had seen a ghost. Grandpa stood proudly beside me, his arm around my shoulder. "I was his best man," he announced with a smile that radiated dignity. Linda found her voice at last, and it came out sharp and trembling. "You did what married her. You barely know this girl. Do you have any idea how reckless that is?" Emily stepped forward, calm and steady. "I may not know you well, Mrs. Moreno, but I know Daniel. I know the way he treats people, the respect he shows his grandfather, and the values he lives by. That tells me everything I need to know about the kind of man he is." Sophie shook her head, staring at me like I had lost my mind. "You seriously married some random girl while we were in South America? Are you insane?" I held Emily's hand tighter and raised my voice so none of them could mistake my resolve. "While you were off pretending to be a perfect family for photos, Grandpa and I were building a real life here. Emily has shown me more kindness in 5 weeks than I have ever seen from you, Mom. And she respects Grandpa, which is more than I can say for the rest of you." Robert finally spoke, his voice low and heavy. "Daniel, this is a lot to process. Marriage is serious. You should have waited for us to come back." I turned to him, anger simmering beneath my calm words. "Waited. The same way you waited at the airport while Mom humiliated Grandpa. The same way you stayed silent when she told him to go home like he was worthless. You don't get to lecture me about what's serious. You abandoned your own father-in-law to protect your wife's pride. I won't live like that." Linda's face twisted, her voice rising. "This is betrayal. You embarrassed us. You think marrying her makes you noble. It makes you a fool." Grandpa stepped forward, then his voice booming with a strength I hadn't heard in years. "No, Linda. The only embarrassment here is the way you treated your own father. I sold my land. I gave you everything I had left, and you tried to leave me behind like trash. Daniel is the only one who stood by me. He gave me dignity when you tried to take it away. That's not foolishness. That's love." The yard fell silent. My mom's face burned red, her lips trembling with words she could not form. My sister Sophie turned away, shame flickering across her expression for the first time. My dad lowered his head, unable to meet Grandpa's eyes. I took a step closer to them, my voice steady. I didn't lose anything by missing South America. I gained everything I actually needed. A wife who loves me, a bond with my grandfather stronger than ever, and the strength to stand up for what's right. Emily's hand slipped into mine again, her eyes soft but unyielding. Grandpa placed his hand on my shoulder with pride radiating from him. Together we stood as a new family, one that valued loyalty and respect over appearances and selfish pride. My mom muttered something under her breath, then yanked her suitcase upright with a jerky motion. "Fine, do what you want, but don't expect me to celebrate this disaster." She stormed inside my sister, trailing behind. My dad lingered at the door, his eyes meeting mine with regret before he followed them. Grandpa sighed deeply, then smiled at me. "You did it, Daniel. You stood your ground. Your grandmother would be proud." As Emily and I stood there with him, I realized that this moment, the confrontation, the shock, the truth finally laid bare, wasn't just about exposing my family's cruelty. It was about reclaiming the meaning of family itself. For the first time, I felt free. The house felt different after that day. The air no longer carried the same weight of control my mother used to hold over every room. For the first time, I wasn't afraid to stand in my own home and say what I believed. My decision to stay with Grandpa and marry Emily had drawn a line none of us could ignore. In the days that followed, my mother barely spoke to me. When she did, her words were sharp and cold. She acted as if my marriage was a stain on the family's reputation. She refused to acknowledge Emily and treated Grandpa as though he no longer existed. She strutted around with the same self-importance, but I could see cracks forming in her control. My sister Sophie stayed glued to her phone. At first, she mocked me, telling her friends how I'd ruined my life by marrying a woman after only a few weeks, but there were moments when I caught her staring at Grandpa, and her eyes softened with something close to guilt. She never apologized, but silence replaced the snide remarks. That was progress in its own way. My father was the most complicated. He had been silent at the airport, and silent when my mother abandoned Grandpa. But after we returned from the courthouse, he began to linger in the evenings instead of hiding in his study. One night, he came out onto the porch where Grandpa and I were sitting. He looked at my grandfather for a long time, then said quietly, "I should have stood up for you. I didn't, and I regret it." Grandpa leaned back in his chair and nodded. "It's not too late to be better, Robert. You still have time." Hearing those words from Grandpa made me realize something important. He wasn't holding on to bitterness. Even after everything my mom had done, even after being humiliated in front of strangers, he was willing to forgive if someone showed genuine remorse. That strength, that grace was something I knew I wanted to carry with me for the rest of my life. Life with Emily became a steady rhythm of simple joys. We cooked meals together in the kitchen, laughed over board games with Grandpa, and spent weekends exploring the parts of our town that most people ignored. She treated Grandpa like family from the start, asking about his stories, driving him to the lake when he felt restless, and even helping him keep up with his journal. She never saw him as a burden. She saw him the way I did, as a man who had given everything for the people he loved. Grandpa began to smile more. He started each day with a light in his eyes, excited to write another page in his journal. He no longer looked like a man weighed down by rejection. He looked like someone who had been restored, given back the dignity that had been stolen from him. The greatest change, however, came from within me. Standing by Grandpa at the airport had been a decision made in anger and instinct, but living with the consequences showed me the power of loyalty. I had given up the chance to see South America, but in exchange I had gained a marriage, a renewed bond with my grandfather, and a clear understanding of what family truly means. I also began to see my mother differently. For years I had excused her sharp words and controlling behavior as stress or personality. But after what happened, I realized that some people put appearances above people, and no matter how much you try, you cannot change them unless they want to change themselves. She may never understand why I chose Grandpa that day, but I no longer needed her approval. What mattered was the life we were building in the aftermath. Grandpa had found joy again. I had found love. Together, we had created something stronger than the false image my mother had been chasing across South America. As the weeks turned into months, people in our town began to notice the shift. Neighbors who had heard whispers about the airport incident came by with quiet words of support. Some shook Grandpa's hand and told him he deserved better. Others congratulated me and Emily, saying our courage to stand by each other had inspired them. The truth was spreading, and it wasn't the story my mom wanted the world to hear. But that no longer mattered. We weren't living for her approval. We were living for ourselves. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in gold and pink, Grandpa sat with Emily and me on the porch. He looked at us with a proud smile and said, "Family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up when it matters. You both showed up for me, and I'll never forget it." That moment stayed with me. Family is not defined by who shares your last name, but by who is willing to sacrifice to stand beside you when the world turns its back. I thought missing South America would be the greatest loss of my life. Instead, it was the beginning of everything I actually needed, a marriage rooted in respect and love, a bond with my grandfather that grew stronger every day, and the freedom to live honestly without pretending for the sake of appearances. Looking back, I don't regret a single choice. If I had to do it all over again, I would still pick up Grandpa's bag at the airport and walk away with him. Because in that moment, I wasn't just saving him from humiliation. I was saving myself from a life where loyalty meant nothing. My grandfather spent $50,000 hoping to buy a trip with his family. He never got that trip, but he gained something priceless, the knowledge that at least one person would never abandon him. And in the process, I gained a life I never could have imagined, one built on love, loyalty, and the kind of family that can never be broken. That day at the airport changed my life forever. I thought I was losing an adventure, but instead, I gained a family that truly valued love and respect. My grandpa found his dignity again. I found a partner who shares my values, and together we built something far more meaningful than any trip across South America could have given us. If this story touched you, let me know in the comments what you would have done if you were in my place. Would you have walked away with your grandfather, or would you have boarded that plane? I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you found this story powerful, please take a second to hit the like button. Share it with someone who needs a reminder of what family really means, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories like this one. Your support helps us keep creating content that inspires challenges and connects us. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next. My grandmother's will changed my life in a way I never expected, while my cousins divided a $9 million estate in Boston. I was handed nothing but a ripped, outdated coat. They laughed at me in that lawyer's office. Michael leaned back in his chair and smirked, asking if I planned to pawn it for lunch money. Sarah whispered just loud enough for everyone to hear, saying it was fitting for someone who always lived like a stray. I held the coat in my hands, trying to hide the humiliation burning inside me. Every eye in the room was on me, waiting to see if I would break. My Uncle Richard gave me that cold little smile of his, the kind that always carried the message that I didn't belong. For a second, I considered throwing the coat in the trash on my way out of the building. But something stopped me. Something about the way my grandmother's hand had folded the fabric, as though it wasn't just a coat, but a message she wanted only me to find. When I got home and ran my fingers along the lining, I felt it. A hard ridge out of place hidden beneath the stitches. I grabbed a pair of scissors and sliced it open. A small, sealed envelope slipped onto the floor. My chest tightened. I opened it, and when I read the words inside, my hands started to shake so badly I nearly dropped the letter. When I walked out of that Cambridge office clutching the worn coat, it felt as though every ounce of dignity had been stripped from me. The polished marble floors, the golden light streaming from chandeliers, and the smell of expensive cologne lingering in the air all belonged to the world of my cousins. I was just a shadow at the edge of it, the forgotten grandson who had no claim to the Carter fortune. I am Daniel Carter, 32 years old, and for as long as I can remember, money has never been my ally. I work at a small independent bookstore in Hartford, surrounded by shelves of dusty novels and poetry that sell slower than the rent climbs. I make enough to keep my one-bedroom apartment barely enough to cover groceries, and never enough to silence the question that follows me everywhere. What would my life have been if my grandmother's love had been matched with her wealth? Margaret Carter, my grandmother, was the anchor of my childhood. She was not the kind of woman who measured people by their bank accounts. She measured them by honesty, kindness, and how they treated others when no one was watching. After my mother, Helen, passed away when I was just 10 years old, it was Margaret Carter who kept me afloat. She brought me into her kitchen, taught me to stir soup while telling stories about her own childhood during the Great Depression, and reminded me that strength was not about loudness, but about quiet persistence. My Uncle Richard never saw me that way. He saw me as a burden. He married into the family after my mother's death, and from the moment he arrived, he treated me as though I had trespassed into a life that did not belong to me. Richard was sharp in his business dealings, ruthless in his judgments, and determined to mold his children into the same. His son Michael grew into arrogance with ease, and his daughter Sarah sharpened her tongue into a weapon. The three of them lived in penthouses and wore tailored suits, while I learned how to stretch $1 at the grocery store. That day in the office, as the lawyer read the will, the gap between us felt wider than ever. The estate was valued at $9 million, split cleanly between Michael and Sarah. They exchanged glances of triumph, the kind of look people give when they believe they have won a race no one else could even enter. My name was mentioned once attached not to Stock's property or savings, but to an heirloom coat described as though it were a consolation prize. When the coat was brought forward wrapped in crisp white tissue paper, I already felt the sting. Michael let out a short laugh, shaking his head. "All those years and this is what you get," he said. His voice carried amusement, but beneath it was cruelty. Sarah leaned in with a smirk, whispering just loud enough, "I guess charity cases don't need trust funds." My Uncle Richard crossed his arms and watched me silent but satisfied. He didn't need to mock me aloud. His silence was his way of stamping the moment into permanence. I wanted to speak to tell them that I didn't need their money, that I had something more valuable, that my grandmother's love was worth more than any check. But the words died in my throat. I could feel heat crawling up my neck, humiliation pressing down on my chest until breathing became difficult. So I stood, thanked the lawyer with a voice that trembled despite my best effort, and walked out with the coat held tight against me. The city outside was alive with movement. Yellow cabs honked, steam rose from the subway grates, and people in tailored jackets hurried past with phones pressed to their ears. I felt invisible among them, carrying what everyone in that office had treated as a worthless rag. The fabric was frayed at the cuffs, the seams worn thin, and one pocket had been patched so many times it looked like a quilt. Yet when I held it close, I remembered winter nights when my grandmother draped it over my shoulders as I sat at her kitchen table with a bowl of soup. It smelled faintly of cedar, the way her house always did. I kept replaying her decision in my mind. Why would she give me nothing more than this coat? She knew the life I had. She knew how hard I worked just to scrape by. She knew how Richard and his children treated me. Was this her final message to me, a reminder that I would never belong in the family's circle of privilege? Or was it her way of saying that love cannot be measured in assets? By the time I reached my apartment, the humiliation had mixed with anger. I threw the coat onto the couch, pacing the floor as Michael's words replayed in my head. All those years, and this is what you get. I wanted to call someone to shout into the phone to let out the bitterness rising inside me, but I had no one to call. Friends at the bookstore would not understand. Family outside of my grandmother's circle had drifted years ago. The silence in my apartment was louder than their laughter. I sat down eventually, staring at the coat. The dim light from my lamp highlighted every crease in the fabric, every stitch that had held it together. I thought of her hands folding it neatly, placing it in tissue paper, making sure it would be delivered to me. My chest tightened. Maybe she had wanted me to remember her not with dollar signs, but with warmth, the way she had always been to me. Still, the sting of that office was too fresh. I reached for the coat, ready to toss it into the trash. That was when I felt it. Something rigid hidden beneath the lining. My fingers traced the seam, and for the first time that day, hope sparked in the darkness. The ridged line beneath the coat's lining stayed in my mind the entire night. I had felt it clearly with my fingertips, but I had been too drained, too ashamed to cut it open right then. I lay awake on the old couch, staring at the ceiling, replaying the snee. The sound of their laughter clung to me like smoke. I imagined them celebrating at some rooftop bar, raising glasses of champagne, clinking their crystal flutes over the millions that had landed in their laps. Meanwhile, I sat alone with a second-hand lamp and peeling paint on my walls, holding a coat that seemed to announce my place in life, forgotten, left behind, insignificant. By morning, humiliation had hardened into anger. I pulled on my jacket, shoved the old coat under my arm, and walked to the corner diner for breakfast. The bell jingled as I entered. I slid into a booth, the coat pressed against my side like an unwanted reminder. The waitress. Linda sat down coffee without asking. She had seen me often enough to know I could not afford more than eggs and toast. She eyed the bundle beside me. "New coat?" she asked. I shook my head. "Old one. My grandmother's." Linda smiled faintly, unaware of the storm churning in me. "Then it's worth more than any new one," she said, before moving on to the next table. Her words were meant kindly, but they stung. Worth more. To me, it felt like proof that I had been dismissed. To Michael and Sarah, it was the punchline to a private joke. My uncle's smirk haunted me most of all. He had wanted this ending, had worked toward it, making sure I was always the outsider. Now he had succeeded. The conflict was not only with them, it was within me. A part of me wanted to cling to the coat as a relic of my grandmother's love. Another part wanted to burn it to erase the humiliation it carried. I could not decide which voice was louder. After breakfast, I walked through the city with the coat folded in my arms. The autumn wind bit at my face. I passed storefronts filled with suits I could never afford, couples dining at tables I would never sit at, and cars I could never dream of driving. Each window reflected me back at myself. A man in thrift store clothes, carrying a relic from another life. As I reached the subway entrance, I stopped at a trash bin. I stood there staring at it, coat in hand. All I had to do was lift the lid and drop it inside. It would be over. I could return to my bookstore job, bury the memory of the will reading, and let the Carter family live in their world of penthouses and privilege. For a moment, the idea felt freeing. Then my fingers brushed the lining again. That hard line beneath the stitches was unmistakable. It had not been there when my grandmother wore it around the house years ago. She had added something. Why? The thought caught hold of me like a hook. I pulled the coat back against my chest and descended into the subway instead. On the train ride back to Hartford, I kept the coat across my lap. The car was crowded. Strangers pressed shoulder to shoulder, but all I could think about was that seam. I remembered how my grandmother had folded it so carefully. She had not simply tossed it into a box. She had wrapped it in tissue, ensuring it would be delivered to me intact. My chest tightened with a new possibility. Maybe this was not rejection. Maybe it was something else. But doubt whispered too. What if it was nothing? What if it was only the uneven stitching of an old coat? If I cut it open and found scraps of paper, or nothing at all, then the last shred of hope would vanish. I would have to accept what my family believed, that I was worth nothing. By the time I arrived back at my apartment, the debate inside me had reached a fever pitch. I dropped the coat on the couch and paced the floor, my heart hammering. The voices of my cousins would not stop echoing in my ears. Michael's laugh, Sarah's hissed remark, Richard's silent approval. They had humiliated me in front of a lawyer, in front of the city, in front of the memory of my grandmother. I stopped pacing and looked at the coat. It lay there silent but full of weight. If I ignored it, I would live with the gnawing question forever. If I opened it and found nothing, I would collapse under the truth. The fear of both choices tore at me. That night I dreamed of my grandmother's kitchen. I was 10 years old again, sitting at the table while she stirred soup. She looked over her shoulder at me with the same eyes that had always carried warmth. "Daniel Carter," she said, "you cannot let them tell you who you are. You must find out for yourself." I woke with tears on my face. The next morning I made my decision. I set the coat on the table, cleared the space, and pulled a pair of scissors from the drawer. My hands trembled as I slid the blade under the seam. With each careful cut, threads snapped like tiny whispers. The sound filled the room. When the final stitch broke, my fingers slipped inside. The hard ridge was there. I gripped it and pulled. Out came a small envelope sealed tightly, its edges yellowed with age. I stared at it, my breath shallow, the weight of everything pressing down on me. This was it. Whatever my grandmother had left me was inside. My humiliation, my anger, my doubt, all of it balanced on this one fragile piece of paper. The envelope sat in front of me, its edges frayed and its seal unbroken. I stared at it as though it were alive, waiting to see if I had the courage to face what it carried. My grandmother's handwriting stretched across the front, looping and uneven with age, but unmistakably hers. I had seen that handwriting on recipe cards, birthday notes, and the small reminders she used to stick on the refrigerator. Seeing it again now made my chest ache. I picked it up and held it in my hands. It was light, fragile, and yet it seemed to weigh more than the entire world. I thought about leaving it sealed, hiding it in a drawer where it would never have the chance to confirm my fears or answer my questions. If I never opened it, then at least hope could live. But hope mixed with fear is not peace. It gnaws at you every time you sit still. I thought of Michael's smirk, Sarah's sharp whisper, and Uncle Richard's satisfied silence. They believed I had been cast aside. They believed I was nothing. My jaw tightened. I refused to carry that humiliation for the rest of my life. If my grandmother had left me a message, I needed to know what it was, even if it broke me. I set the envelope down, walked to the sink, and splashed cold water on my face. My reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror looked back at me with hollow eyes. I whispered, "You have nothing left to lose." My voice was unsteady, but it was the only push I needed. Back at the table, I slid a knife gently under the seal. The paper cracked as it tore open, releasing a faint, musty smell of old cedar and ink. My hands trembled as I unfolded the letter inside. The paper was thin, the handwriting shaky, but every stroke was filled with intent. Before I read it, I hesitated again. Memories flooded me. My grandmother laughing in the garden as I chased fireflies, her hands steady on mine as she taught me how to knead dough, her voice telling me stories late into the night when I was too afraid to sleep alone. She had been more of a parent than anyone else ever was. She had been my shelter. Could this letter reveal that she had seen me as less than her other grandchildren all along? The fear nearly made me fold it back and tuck it away. But then I heard her voice in memory, calm and steady. "Daniel, truth is never your enemy. Lies are." I began to read. The first line was simple. "My dearest Daniel, if you are holding this letter, then you are the one I trusted most." I stopped stunned. My breath caught in my throat. The words were not rejection. They were trust. I read on. She wrote of the estate the way Richard and his children had always worshipped appearances. She explained that leaving them the fortune was not a reward but a test. She wanted to see what they would do with wealth when it was placed in their hands without effort. She knew greed would consume them, and she wanted me far from that destruction. Then she revealed something that made my heart pound louder than the traffic outside. She had accounts, properties, and investments that no one else in the family knew about. Assets she had kept separate from the estate secured under my name, with instructions hidden in the letter on how to access them. She had not left me behind. She had left me everything that truly mattered to her legacy. I dropped the letter to the table, overwhelmed. My head spun, my chest ached, and my vision blurred. For so long I had believed I was the forgotten one, the unworthy grandson. But here it was in her own handwriting. I was the one she trusted most. The coat lay crumpled beside the letter, its seams torn open, the fabric rough under my fingers. It no longer looked worthless. It looked deliberate, chosen a vessel for the truth. She had hidden her last words where only I would think to look. She knew Richard would never bother with it. She knew Michael and Sarah would sneer and toss it aside. But she knew I would hesitate, hold on, and discover the secret within. I rose from the table and paced the room, the letter clutched in my hand. Questions tumbled through my head. Why me? Why had she chosen me to carry this weight? Did she know how unprepared I felt? How small I often saw myself? Then I remembered the nights when she told me I was stronger than I realized. She had believed in me long before I could believe in myself. Still, fear pressed against my ribs. If the letter was true, then my life had just changed forever. Money on that scale was something I had never touched, never even imagined. Could I handle it? Would I become like them if I allowed wealth to dictate who I was? The thought chilled me. I sat back down, read the letter again, and reached the final lines. Daniel Wealth reveals the truth in people. That is why I give it to you. You cared for me when no one else did. You never saw me as a bank or a burden. You saw me as your grandmother. You have the heart to carry this. Promise me you will not let them break you. Promise me you will remember who you are. The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. I pressed the paper to my chest and closed my eyes. I whispered into the quiet room, I promise. The decision was made. I would not run from this responsibility. I would not let fear or humiliation drive me. I would follow the instructions, contact the lawyer named in the letter, and step into the life my grandmother had prepared for me in silence. For the first time in years, I felt something close to hope. I folded the letter carefully, slid it back into the envelope, and placed it inside the coat's inner pocket where it belonged. The coat was no longer a symbol of rejection. It was a key, a bridge from humiliation to redemption. My grandmother's final gift. The following morning, I woke with a letter still pressed against my chest. My eyes were swollen from the tears that had carried me into sleep, but my body felt steadier than it had in months. I brewed a pot of coffee, sat at the table with the letter laid out before me, and read it again word by word, as if I needed to etch every line into my memory. The instructions were clear. My grandmother had placed a separate trust in my name hidden from the estate, secured with the help of an attorney whose contact information was written neatly at the bottom of the page. My hands shook as I picked up the phone. I dialed the number, half expecting it to be disconnected or answered by someone who would laugh at me for believing in a fantasy. But a calm voice greeted me. "Office of Thomas Miller," the man said. My throat tightened. "This is Daniel Carter," I managed to say. "I believe you may have something left for me by Margaret Carter." There was a long pause on the other end, followed by a shift in tone. "Mr. Carter, I've been expecting this call for some time. Why don't you come in today?" The office was in a modest brick building downtown. Nothing like the marble tower where Richard and his children had celebrated their inheritance. Thomas Miller was an older man with kind eyes, the kind that reminded me of teachers who actually cared. He gestured for me to sit, then slid a folder across the desk. "Your grandmother was deliberate," he said. "She wanted to protect you, and she wanted you to carry her legacy, not just her name." I opened the folder with shaking hands. Inside were documents, property deeds, account statements, investment portfolios. Numbers swam in front of my eyes: properties in Cambridge and Somerville, a farmhouse in Vermont, several investment accounts that had grown steadily for decades. The figures totaled more than anything I could process, far beyond the $9 million my cousins had fought over. My breath caught. "This can't be right," I whispered. "It is right," Thomas said gently. "She built this quietly. She told me you were the only one she trusted to see it for what it was, a tool, not a trophy. She believed the others would waste their share, but she believed you would build." Tears blurred my vision. For years I had lived believing I was the forgotten grandson. The charity case mocked and dismissed. Now, staring at those papers, I realized my grandmother had never abandoned me. She had chosen me. I leaned back, unable to speak. The weight of humiliation, anger, and loneliness I had carried since the will reading seemed to peel away, replaced by a trembling sense of vindication. Michael's laughter, Sarah's sneers, Richard's silence, all of it lost its power. They had celebrated scraps while my grandmother had entrusted me with her true legacy. When I left the office, the city looked different. The same honking taxis, the same rushing crowds, the same cold wind between buildings, but my chest no longer felt tight with shame. For the first time in years, I walked with my head high. Later that week, I saw them again. Michael and Sarah invited me to dinner, their invitation dripping with condescension. They chose a high-rise restaurant where the chandeliers glittered and the waiters carried plates like works of art. They wanted to gloat again. I arrived wearing the same coat, now stitched carefully where I had cut it open, the envelope still resting inside the pocket like a heartbeat. Michael leaned back in his chair when he saw me. "Still hanging on to that thing? Maybe if you polish it enough, someone will think it's vintage." Sarah laughed. "Daniel, you could have joined us in Paris if you'd gotten something real from Grandma. Instead, you're stuck in Hartford with that rag." Their voices no longer pierced me. I smiled, calm and steady. "You're right," I said. "All I have is this coat. But sometimes the things people overlook are worth more than they realize." They scoffed, rolling their eyes, already dismissing me. That was fine. Let them. They didn't know what I carried in my pocket, and they never would. On the train home, I pulled the letter out and read it again. My grandmother's words steadied me. "You have the heart to carry this." The truth was, she had given me more than money. She had given me back my sense of worth. She had reminded me that the world does not decide who you are. The people who love you, who truly see you, are the ones who define your place. Back in my apartment, I hung the coat carefully in the closet. I touched the fabric one last time and whispered, "Thank you, Grandma." That night I lay in bed wide awake, not from fear, but from possibility. My grandmother's trust meant I had the chance to shape a future that did not look like the cold arrogance of Richard or the greedy laughter of Michael and Sarah. I had the chance to build something better, something lasting, something she would be proud of. The humiliation of that will reading had nearly broken me, but it was the beginning of a truth I could never have imagined. In that cracked office, when the lawyer handed me a torn coat, while everyone else celebrated millions, I thought I had lost everything. Now I understood I had been given everything that mattered. The power of that realization swept through me like a tide. My grandmother had not left me behind. She had chosen me. And with that choice, she had given me the chance to rise above the people who tried to keep me small. The days that followed were unlike anything I had ever experienced. For the first time, I did not wake to the sound of my alarm, dreading another long day of shelving books while my paycheck slipped through my fingers before the month was over. Instead, I woke with a letter that gave me a new sense of purpose. My grandmother's words echoed in me every morning. She had trusted me. She had seen me not as the forgotten one, not as the burden Richard always called me, but as the only one strong enough to carry her true legacy. At first, I told no one. The weight of what she had left me was too great to reveal. The money, the properties, the accounts. It was overwhelming. But even more overwhelming was the responsibility. I thought about my grandmother's kitchen, the way she taught me that strength was not measured by how much you had, but by how you treated others when you had it. I knew I could not let her down. Richard, Michael, and Sarah continued flaunting their inheritance. They posted pictures online of trips to Paris parties and penthouses and shopping sprees with designer bags piled high. To them, the estate was proof of their worth, a trophy they could wave in the faces of others. Yet behind their polished smiles, I could already see the cracks. Michael's arrogance grew louder. Sarah's tone became more desperate, as if she feared losing her grip on the lifestyle she had been handed. Months later, I learned that their millions were shrinking fast. Investments were squandered on bad deals. Luxury became a hungry beast that devoured everything they owned. By the end of the year, they were still living in expensive apartments, but whispers of debt followed them. Then, one evening, as snow began to fall outside my apartment, I received a call. It was Sarah. Her voice, usually sharp and confident, trembled. "Daniel," she said, "can we talk maybe over dinner?" I could hear the strain she tried to hide. For years, she had mocked me, laughed at me, treated me as if I were beneath her. Now, she reached out not with laughter, but with desperation. Michael followed days later with a message full of forced friendliness asking if I wanted to catch up. I knew what they wanted. They had begun to sense the truth. Somehow they knew I was not struggling anymore. I met them once more, this time in the same restaurant where they had mocked me for wearing the coat. Michael's suit looked sharper than ever, but his eyes darted nervously when he spoke. Sarah kept her voice sweet, but her hands twisted the napkin in her lap. They tried to ask careful questions, circling the subject, probing without directly begging. I listened calm and steady, sipping water as though I had all the time in the world. When the moment came, I leaned forward. "You mocked me when all I had was this coat. You laughed when I walked out of that office. And yet this coat carried something you could never buy. Her trust. I don't need to prove that to you, but I will never forget how you treated me when you thought I had nothing." They fell silent, their arrogance deflating like a balloon pricked with a pin. For once, they had no words. I left them there not with anger, but with clarity. I no longer needed their approval. I no longer carried their mockery like a wound. My grandmother had healed that the moment she entrusted me with her secret. In the months that followed, I began to put her legacy to use. I restored the farmhouse in Vermont she had left, turning it into a community center for children who had grown up the way I had, lonely, overlooked, uncertain of their worth. I funded scholarships for students who could not afford college but had the determination to push forward. I built something that honored her, something that reflected the heart she had always given me. The coat still hangs in my closet. I do not wear it often, but sometimes on quiet nights I take it out, trace the stitches I cut open, and hold it close. It reminds me of where I began. It reminds me that even when the world laughs, even when family betrays you, love has a way of breaking through. The lesson my grandmother gave me is one I will carry forever. Money reveals who people are. Some will waste it, some will worship it, and a rare few will use it to build. She trusted me to be one of the few. As I sit here telling this story, I think back to that day in the lawyer's office when humiliation pressed me down and I believed I was nothing. If I had thrown the coat away, I would never have found the envelope. I would never have heard her last words. I would never have discovered that what seemed worthless was worth more than gold. To anyone listening who feels overlooked or dismissed, remember this. Value is not always visible on the surface. Sometimes it is hidden in the places others mock or ignore. Sometimes the smallest thing can hold the greatest gift. My grandmother's legacy was not only the wealth she hid in that coat. It was the reminder that I was never forgotten, never unworthy, and never powerless. That is the gift I carry now, and it is greater than any fortune. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs a reminder of their worth. Leave a comment below and tell me what part of the story resonated most with you. Hit the like button if you want to hear more real stories told from the heart. And most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next one. Thank you for being here, and thank you for listening.